This episode of the Aquarius Podcast is sponsored by Aquarium Co-op and their amazing all-in-one fertilizer, Easy Green. If you're like me and love planted tanks but weren't born with an aquatic green thumb, Easy Green is the stuff for you. Easy Green is super easy to dose, and I use it in all of my planted tanks, both high and low-tech setups. I follow the instructions on the bottle, and the results are healthy, vibrant plants. I know so many other aquarists who swear by Easy Green and their tanks look amazing. You can even go back to previous episodes of this podcast where you hear several guests talk about their experience and love for this stuff. So head on over to aquariumcoop.com, drop some Easy Green in your cart, and use the code Aquarius5 at checkout to receive 5% off your order. And if you needed it, Corey has numerous videos on the Aquarium Co-op YouTube channel where he talks all about Easy Green, how to use it, and shows off his own tanks at home and in the store that are thriving on the stuff. Lastly, if you're enjoying the podcast, share the show with your friends, leave a rating wherever you listen to the episodes, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Wednesday, October 10th, 2018. My guest today is Jason Gregory. Jason is the owner of Clear Fabrications Incorporated. Clear Fabrications offers world-class acrylic tanks, steel stands, filters, furniture, and even consulting. Jason has been in business with Clear Fabrications since 2002, where he's provided countless tanks and setups for aquarium retail stores and private enthusiasts of both fresh and salt water. So Jason, welcome to the Aquarius Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think having you on, I think this is going to be a really, cool topic to have somebody on that is an actual tank manufacturer, a custom tank manufacturer, because, so many of my guests are people that, they're Aquarius rather. They're home hobbyists. They're people that have aquariums, but we're always focusing on the things in the aquarium, right? We don't ever, I've never taken it farther back up the supply chain, if you will, to actually to the point of manufacture of these glass or acrylic boxes in this tank. And so I think this is going to be a really fun, really interesting conversation, and definitely a departure from talking about an endangered fish or a goldfish or, an importing business. So thank you very much for taking time and coming on the show.
No problem. Nothing I like better than talking about custom acrylic aquariums.
It's a perfect fit then. All right, so Jason, you started though as a hobbyist, correct? Like you have roots
Absolutely.
As a hobbyist. Okay, and so and dare I ask? I don't know the answer to this question beforehand. Fresh or salt water?
Well, I started my aquarium keeping probably when I was about 8 years old. Had a 29-gallon aquarium with the under gravel filter and the air pump and the whole 9 yards, and kept just community fish, and then took a little break, probably 14, 15, got interested in other things, and then in my young adult life, I had my first place, and I'm like, I want to get a saltwater tank. I mean, that was the goal. And so I started to do some research, and, because I knew that it was expensive, so I didn't want to waste money unnecessarily. So, and I found out real quick that I was way under the curve. I wasn't comfortable spending money on anything. So, ended up that I had some extra time on my hands. So I got a part-time job at a very successful fresh and saltwater store. That was probably 1992. And then I got a saltwater tank, and I could make, some better decisions, with equipment and, just learning livestock and compatibility and things like that. That was instrumental into being successssel.
Gotcha. And so I didn't even let you know that primarily this is a show for freshwater. So I'm glad that you at least have your origins in freshwater, so that
Sure.
You're not a complete salty guy. But we won't hold that against you. We try not to. I try not to bash the saltwater guys on here too much. So set the scene a little bit. I guess a little more context. Your business is you're out of Seattle, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and so back in 1992, were you still local in the Seattle area, or was this somewhere else in the country?
Yeah. I was born and raised in the Seattle area.
Okay, gotcha. And so now that you're working for a fresh and saltwater store, so then how do you start getting into building the setups?
Yeah, well, I took a look at the primitive wet dry filters that we had available to us, and the type of money that they were charging, and I was just like, man, I can build this. And I started to research, acrylic, and bought some acrylic from just a general acrylic fabricator. I thought it was a fortune at the time, but times have changed. I mean, it's nothing for me to spend, $2,500 on one sheet of thick acrylic for a big tank. And, but anyway, I took my dad's, router that he got for Christmas, like 1978 or something like that. And, he'd never used it. And I remember buying my first flush, cutting router bit. I think I spent like $18 on it. I thought I was a big baller at the time, and started whittling away on some acrylic and learning how to bond it. And humble beginnings, so to speak, for sure. So I started building sumps and wet dry filters and things like that. And then when my boss at the time saw what I built, he came over to my house to check it out, and he's like, "Oh, you got to build me one of these." And it was way nicer than what anything that was commercially available. And then he showed all of his buddies, and then it just exploded from there. So I built sumps for people, and that's how I got my start.
Oh, awesome. And so what was while you were kind of, before your boss came over to your house to check out your setup, were you kind of selling sumps on the side then? Like, I guess, how were you finding customers as an outlet for your product?
Well, I just built one for myself first, and then my boss saw it. He wanted one. I built him one, and then he showed it off to all of his buddies. Look at what my buddy built for me, and then they wanted them all, and then it just exploded from there. And built some through the store. Started selling them to the store that he managed, and that's just where it started.
And so then are we back at like what, 2002 at about that point then?
Yeah, 2002, 2003, and then I think probably right around 2000 or 19. That was about, I think about 1996 or 7. That particular manager bought a store. I'll just name drop it, Saltwater City in Bellevue, Washington. He bought that store, and he brought me over, and we rebuilt all the sumps for the store, big commercial system, and worked on it and got it up to par. And then that store was very successful, and I worked with him for about 7-8 years, and then it was time for me to start my own fabricating, aquarium fabrication business. So that's the general overview anyway.
Nice. So help a layperson in sump land. Like I know enough about sumps to be dangerous and start a conversation, but probably not be able to finish it. So what was it about your sumps that were so much better than what was commercially available?
Well, I used thicker material, so there was less potential for failure. Back in the beginning of sumps, a lot of 3/16 inch and 1/4 inch material was used, and they weren't very user friendly. They were just pretty primitive by today's standards, and so I advanced the user friendliness of the sumps, made them more efficient, and people loved them. They perform. I just, like, for instance, I just completed a 500-gallon freshwater system for a guy, and running African cichlids. So he's packing a 500-gallon tank full of African cichlids. So he needed a wet dry that could perform. So I completed it's a 288-gallon capacity sump for him, and 50 gallons of bio balls. So there's no way he could put too many fish in there for him to get ammonia and nitrite spikes.
Wow, that's huge.
It would be impossible.
Wow, that's more than 50, more than half of the main tank display is in sump capacity. That's crazy. Yeah,
he's a crazy guy. So when he unleashed me on that project, that's what he ended up with. So
yeah, very cool. And I would say, kind of what you hit on with the commercial sumps, kind of using that, the thickness that they chose to go with. I mean, it's probably, one of those bean counter decisions of what's the thinnest and cheapest material that we can use to, increase profits, and just kind of skate by with, a failure rate that is acceptable, right? Like, we know that they could use a slightly thicker glass and have better performance, maybe eat a little bit into the margin, maybe pass a little bit on. But I think when they're producing at that mass scale, like, that decision really doesn't, I don't know who's ultimately making the call, but, in the end, the consumer is the one that ends up, getting a kind of a subpar product. And then, you've got somebody like you that can come in and see that is something that's lacking and actually apply and use an appropriate material. Especially when you're talking about water in your home, right? Like, you don't want to worry about 100 or 50 or however many gallons, even 1 gallon of water spilling on your carpet, spilling on your hardwood. Like, that's just not something you want to worry about. So, I can definitely appreciate that.
I've seen more heaters burn through those commercially available sumps because they use 3/16 and 1/4 inch material. If they just pass a heater in there, it could potentially over time burn right through that thin material. So most of my sumps are a lot of 3/8 and a lot of 1/2 inch material, and that's it's stout stuff. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, nice. And so from your business perspective and your business growth, maturity, if you will, at what point did you transition from just doing sumps to actually now you're starting to make the display tanks?
Yeah, I started building tanks for another manufacturer in that 97, 98 time frame. Worked for him for about 3.5 years, and I learned a lot of things on how not to run a shop, let alone, he didn't really teach me anything that, fabrication wise that I didn't already know, but, how to not run a shop is pretty important stuff. So in 2002, that's when I said, okay, I'm going to build tanks and filters and all different types of fabrication. Whatever somebody needs, I'll be able to do. So, and that's when I opened my doors to Claire Fabrications, and in the beginning, I just sold tanks wholesale to stores and aquarium maintenance companies and things like that. And then, but I kept getting calls from individuals saying, hey, somebody referred me to you. I want a custom tank, and it's just way over the store, their it's way over what they're capable of taking on. And so, I always like a challenge. So I took them up on their challenge, and was nothing I hadn't seen before. And, customers were extremely happy and would tuck my name all over the back then it was all the internet forums for saltwater and freshwater too. I'd probably split my business probably 15% freshwater customers, and the bulk, 85% or whatever is high-end saltwater reef tanks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of, from my time perusing forums and just, being in the hobby, that's kind of what I would figure as far as, when people go that custom route, I feel like they're typically going to be the saltwater guys. I guess us freshwater guys, we're just a little bit on the cheaper end, and we stick to glass tanks on $1 a gallon sale. But
sure,
I think
sure.
at some point in my career, I'm definitely going to step it up and get like a nice acrylic setup. And I think we'll talk more probably about the differences between glass and acrylic. But again, back to
Sure.
back to 2002. So then, are we out of the garage, or this is when you actually, you're throwing down money and you've got an establishment, you're actually opening up somewhere in a commercial district?
Yeah, I just like a lot of startups. They start out of their house, and I had a 2-car garage that I completely turned it into a fabrication studio. It was only 25 by 25. So not a lot of square footage, but I put big lights in there, insulated it, rewired the whole place for 220, and had an absolute ball, buying table saws and joiners, and I already had a selection of routers at that time, but making it real and having a dedicated fabrication table. It's got to be flat. It's got to be like a surface plate in a machine shop type of a thing. And that's why I can't, it's impossible for me to not build a flat, perfectly parallel tank. And, and that comes back to my track record. Track record's everything. I mean, I've got over 1,400 tanks in service for the last 16 years, and a 0 failure rate. I've never had a tank fail, and that's me quality controlling everything at every step of the way. And do you have to pay for that? Sure. I can't compete with a commercial California brand acrylic tank manufacturer that makes 155-gallon tanks, a day. I can't, they on a massive scale, but they have failures. I don't.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of it has to do with one guy taking it from a full sheet of material to a finished tank, and if it doesn't pass at one of those phases, I'm not just going to push it through. It doesn't work. My name is, and my reputation is everything.
Yeah, I mean, if we just go back to, we talk about, that the catastrophic blowout of a tank, the moment that happens in your house, you're like, man, going with the other guy that was a little bit more, starting to sound like a pretty good deal at this point, as I'm, calling the local Serv Pro or whoever it is that's going to come help you clean your mess out of your house. So,
Sure.
I think, you having your confidence, standing by your craft, right? Like, you're a craftsman at this point, right? You're making, a high-end product. You're making something that's going to be dependable. And, to be proud of that, and to kind of, whether brag's the right word, I think that's completely appropriate. I mean, I think if somebody's out there looking for a custom tank, and I think we'll get into features maybe right now, but, that's the kind of thing that I think you want to know, right? You want to know that your guy his product as though he is a craftsman, right? Because he knows he's a craftsman and he's producing a very, very high quality product, something that's going to last an incredibly long time. So I think something else that could differentiate you from a mass producer is the attention to detail and the feedback on what customers want in their tanks. So just outside of dimensions, can you kind of walk me through what are some of the features that you can build into a tank and that you have built into a tank that are, maybe they're one-offs, but they're things that a customer was really, really looking for to be able to do something in their tank, whether it's feeding or maintenance or something like that?
Oh, it's endless. I don't know if we have enough time to go into everything, but every person has, the tank's in a different location. There's no two tanks the same. So, the first thing that I ask, potential clients is what type of animals are you planning on keeping? So if they're, freshwater or saltwater or a reef tank, I already have, okay, we're going to take this left turn and go down this direction. And everybody has a different things that are their hot buttons. Most of my clients, we reverse engineer these reef tanks because they're very demanding environments. Water flow, how many gallons per hour we're going to run through the sump, because there's protein skimmers. It's endless. And then, some of these people, they want massive access to their corals and things like that because their hands are wet more than they're dry. There's people that just, that's what they live for. I kind of feel like I'm a drug dealer, giving somebody a fix. Sometimes
you're an enabler.
The reef tank is definitely, it's driving the industry, and the freshwater guys, they're just reaping all the benefits, LED lights and, DC pumps and all these things. Those are developments for the saltwater guys, but, just porthole configurations, overflow boxes, some, like probably a freshwater community tank is not going to need the turnover, gallons per hour from the sump pumped into the tank that, a reef tank does, or, that type of thing. So everything gets reverse engineered, and then we can sit down and start making some drawings and dimensions. A lot of people come to me because they know that I can stick a certain dimension, like if they're going to do a flush, like a picture frame in the wall type of a tank. And I've had clients come to me where they say, hey, I bought this tank from this builder, and it wasn't even square, and I go to put it in my wall and it doesn't fit.
Oh, wow.
And, so I can nail, very, close tolerances, whereas some major manufacturers, they don't. It's plus their tolerance is, plus or minus a quarter of an inch. That's a mile to me. If I'm off, a 32nd, I'm like, ugh, it grinds on me, but,
Yeah, that's that's all good things to hear, man. That you treat it as such a perfectionist, and I like I said, I can definitely appreciate that. Has there been an ask for a feature in a tank that kind of made you scratch your head and you're like, well, you're the boss, and if that's what you want, that any request that was kind of out of the norm?
Not really. I've seen it all. I've said no to a lot of things. One person, they wanted a tank that was pretty tall, and then they wanted me to notch it because it would sit under a beam. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way, man. I'm sorry, you're talking to the wrong guy. yeah, I mean, I say no to stuff like that all the time. I've done formed panel tanks. I mean, you name the shape, I built it. Um, I don't have an oven in my shop. I'm not interested in taking up that much room with something that I don't use that often. But I have a company that does all my forming. I build all the templates and build the form, and then they cook a piece of acrylic kind of like a pizza and drape it over my form, and when it cools then it takes that shape. It's you just can't do that with glass so easily.
Yeah, I got you. Actually, Jason, that's a pretty good segue. So let's frame this this conversation or this next kind of series from the lens of I'm new to the hobby. I've got money in my pocket, burning a hole. I want to get a custom tank. Kind of give me the breakdown of glass versus acrylic. Obviously, we're talking a lot about the finished product, kind of what you do, your history with acrylic. But in the world according to Jason, glass versus acrylic, what's kind of the breakdown here?
Well, the biggest difference is acrylic can be modified, can be repaired, it can be reconditioned. There's not a lot of things that you can't do with acrylic, whereas glass, you can also look at the warranties on. I mean, that's a huge difference between glass and acrylic. I mean, my warranty is 10 years unconditional, whereas glass tanks, I mean, I think the longest glass tank warranty that I've seen is 2 years. And, that doesn't bode too well with me. But like a big tank, weight is a huge concern. I mean, I have a buddy of mine that has a 450-gallon glass tank, and it's an Elos. It's a high-end Italian-made tank, and it is heavy. I tell him, you can borrow my suction cups, but don't plan on me being there because, it's extremely heavy. Whereas a 450-gallon acrylic tank, I mean, 4 guys can pick it up and carry it wherever you want. So weight's a big concern. Also clarity. Acrylic is about as clear as you can get, whereas glass, unless you get into the low iron type stuff, you're gonna have a green tinge to it. And then the corners, I don't do any bending of acrylic because that gives you a weak point in the transition between the heated part of the acrylic and the non-heated part. It's not the rounded corner that is given the issue. It's the transition between the unheated and heated part. And you'd have to have a room to anneal those tank parts in order to make it right.
And so I think I know what annealing is, but could you give us a breakdown? What is annealing real quick?
Yeah, annealing, you're basically heating up the material real slowly and then cooling it off really slowly, and that relaxes all the molecules in between that state of where the acrylic's been heated and not heated. So, and then everything relaxes and there's no tension or stress on any parts on that. So I don't really have a room to dedicate to annealing parts. So, and the major tank manufacturers, they don't either. It's a process that's not done on a production tank. So, but I do all square corners, but I can round them over, with, make the profile a round over and hand sand and polish that to where it looks like a bent front tank. Or, I can do all kinds of different profiles, just with a straight chamfer is what mainly people ask for. And when you hand sand and polish that, it looks pretty awesome.
Awesome. And now, and one of the things I've heard about acrylic, right, is that it can scratch, right? Like that's what when people talk about glass versus acrylic, it's acrylic will scratch a little bit easier. But is that something though that if you know what you're doing, that scratch could potentially be buffed out?
Absolutely. Acrylic tanks, that's the first thing. I mean, you get a lot of people, acrylic tanks scratch easy. Well, if you can wash your car without scratching it, then you can take care of an acrylic tank. It's really that simple. Now, if you have a algae magnet that you use, you'd want to be careful when you start getting close to your sand. I mean, that's just fundamentals.
Yeah.
You carve up a glass tank just as easy as you would an acrylic tank. Yeah. But with acrylic, you can, smooth out a scratch on the inside of the tank with your animals, still inside the tank. You don't have to drain it or anything. So, once you carve up a glass tank, you're done. It's going to be there forever.
Yeah, and then I also have the joy of, I'm one of the people that got a tank, didn't check it for whether it was tempered or plate glass, and just assumed that it was going to be plate glass, and exploded the side out of a 75-gallon tank because apparently the producers decided to, or the manufacturer decided to use, or they needed to use tempered as opposed to the traditional plate. So that was a really fun experience where, that's not really a concern with acrylic, right? Like if you need to drill for an overflow after the fact, that's something that can be done, and you don't have to, take polarized glasses and a computer screen to try to see if you can drill it or not.
Yeah, glass takes, special diamond tipped drill bits to put your holes in, whereas you can just use a regular hole saw. And I mean, I have every hole saw known to man and every size, and a few of them have thousands and thousands of holes on them, and it doesn't, life expectancy of tools is pretty good with acrylic. But yeah, you can Swiss cheese the bottom of an acrylic tank. You can put however many holes you want to in there, whereas glass, you only have, you can only put 2 holes per, 6 inches, or I don't know, whatever. Different manufacturers have different specifications, but they'll limit the holes because it's, there's a fault line that you're creating when you drilling holes through glass. But yeah, acrylic is repairable, drillable, modifiable. It's a wonderful material. And here in the Pacific Northwest, where there's power outages, and acrylic will retain that heat longer than a glass tank will.
That's actually really cool to know. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that mentioned.
Yeah, the glass tank, they're great in hot climates for, let's say Arizona to shed heat, but in the Pacific Northwest, acrylic's king. If you have a power outage, it's going to retain that heat longer.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Yeah, that's
really great. Really great insulator.
Yeah, and so let's talk about just the fundamentals of bonding, right? So we're not, acrylic, we're not getting this gigantic block and CNC milling it down, right? So we're taking panels just like we are with glass, although that'd be kind of cool to see. We're taking individual panels of varying thickness depending on what size and length and width and all these various, critical dimensions. With glass, we're putting these things together and we're hitting it with a bead of silicone, right? And,
Yeah.
how long that silicone lasts us, I think is up for debate. Whether, the tank sits out after being wet for, an extended period of time can have an impact on how long that silicone is going to hold. But what is the, again, kind of basic layman terms, like what happens when how are we getting those acrylic panels together?
Well, a typical 90-degree joint in, like, say, the corner of a tank or overflow box, a sump, or whatever, you need to make sure that is a true 90 degrees. And then I take a jig, a 90-degree jig that sets that second panel at 90 degrees, and I machine that edge, pretty tight tolerances. We're talking, under a thousandth of an inch in variation between one end to the other. It's got to be flat. It's got to be straight. And when I mill that down, the edge finishes, it looks almost polished. And then, so I stick those two pieces where they need to be. I measure probably 15 or 20 times to make sure they're where they need to be. If it's some goofy dimension, if the tank needs to be 49 and 13/16, that's what it's going to be when it comes out of the shop. So, I usually have about a quarter of an inch overhang that I'll flush trim later. And then I use the pin method. I have certain pins that I use, certain diameters for certain thicknesses. And I'll put, I mix my own solvent. I can tailor it to different temperature and different humidity conditions. I heat and air condition my shop to stay within the sweet spot between 65 and 75 degrees, and year round. So every batch of solvent that I mix up, I do a strength test, and if it doesn't pass, which I've never had a batch not pass to date, and then I can proceed. So then I'll lay that solvent in that joint, and too much will make a mess. Not enough will not be a very aesthetically pleasing joint, as well as not a very strong joint. So there's a lot of things that go into a good bonded joint.
Yeah, and that pin method, right? So we've got pins, small pins of, like you said, varying thickness, diameter, and they're spaced every so many inches, or so many centimeters, at whatever you're doing to actually keep those two pieces from touching, and then you're going in between those with your solvent, right? And then you pull pins, and it comes into full contact, and then it has that chemical reaction where it basically just welds it.
Yeah, it softens, about 30 thousandths deep in both panels, and when it squishes together, it's physically becoming one part. And acrylic tanks are super strong, at least the ones that I build, and the ones that we're putting a huge demand on a box. It's got to hold water, for a long time. So, we don't mess around. We take our edge prep seriously, and, all the factors. There's so many factors. Whereas glass tanks, you just need a little bead of silicone, squish it together, and,
you're good to go.
Hope and pray that it stays put together for a while,
Yeah, and something else important to probably point out too for people is that while you're talking about going through this painstaking process for quality, you also have money on the line, right? Like sure it's a tank for somebody, but until you deliver a finished quality product, like that's on you.
Yep.
So you want to,
Absolutely.
and these sheets, like you said earlier, what they can get up to a couple $1,000s for just one of the panels, right? And now if you're talking about joining two couple $1,000 panels together, or now you're putting multiple panels together that have already been formed, I mean, there's a lot of money on the line.
Yeah, it sure is. Sure is.
I'd lose a lot of sleep if I were you, man. I'm glad you need to be a confident guy that's well versed in your craft to play in the custom acrylic space, man. That's for certain. So I want to talk more about some of some of your customers, not in particular, but location wise. I know you're out of Seattle as your home base, but where have you delivered tanks to or sent tanks to in the country, and have you done any international shipping? Or any international customers, yes. I should say?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, I have tanks in Canada. I've got a handful of tanks in Mexico. I've got a bunch. I mean, Hawaii isn't a different country, but it's taking a boat ride for sure. So I've got a bunch of tanks in Hawaii. I have tanks as far as Australia. And then in the U.S., I pretty much have tanks in every state on this half of the continental United States. And then for some reason, I have a strong following in New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, and Texas. So I'm consistently shipping to those places.
Oh wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that's actually a cool little fun fact to know. Where in the United States, at least, where you have a strong presence. So I don't know, maybe the New Yorkers and New Jersey people, maybe your confidence, maybe that attracts them.
Well, I think it's just the forums that were popular years ago, at least for me anyway. The Facebook pages, all the groups, saltwater groups, they, see somebody's tank, hey, where'd you get that? And bam, it just, word of mouth is incredible. I've been putting, pictures of builds up on my Instagram, page, and, I have a page at Facebook, so people can get a hold of me, in a number of places. Also, my website gets hits, not as much as you'd think, but, people check it out. I'm not a professional website designer, so that's, that probably plays a factor, but, worldclassaquariums.com is
Yeah, we'll make sure that we have show links to your Facebook, your Instagram, and your business page. So we'll make sure that that's just an easy click away for the listeners, so they can go and check you out. And at the very least, for sure, follow your Instagram, follow your Facebook to see what kind of cool things you're cooking up in your shop. Because who doesn't want to nerd out on seeing really cool acrylic custom tanks coming out of your shop? I know I've been following you for a while now, so it's good stuff. It's sure we all like seeing the fish porn and all that good stuff, but sometimes you just need to see some kind of clean, brand new setups, and that's that's a cool part of the hobby too.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you go to a public aquarium, do you kind of like nerd out, and are you looking more at the actual like the aquarium itself, like the acrylic? Are you nerding out on that at all, or is it just?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate fish. Like I was just in Las Vegas, and what was that? What was that hotel that we were? Caesars. No, it wasn't. The one with the.
I feel like they all have nice saltwater or setups in all of those casinos that you walk through.
Yeah. They're definitely impressive. Just the size and some of the acrylic thicknesses that are used for these big, huge displays are impressive. Definitely past the scope of what I do, but those guys are doing fundamentally the same thing that I do, just on a much larger scale.
Would
That's pretty impressive.
Would you ever at least once kind of in your career, like, is it a bucket list item to, if, I don't know, let's say Seattle Aquarium, right? Like they want to put in this brand new ocean, curved Monterey Bay style aquarium display, right? And they tap a couple different custom guys to come work on this. Like, is that kind of a dream? Like, would that be really cool for you to work on? Or is that something where, you appreciate it, but you want to stay away from that?
Yeah, I'd be in the latter. I have a very, very specific range that I work in and that I'm comfortable and confident in. And after that, that's somebody else.
Yeah, no worries.
Reynolds Palmer comes to mind. I mean, it would be really cool to go and hang out in those guys' shop. I mean, they do crazy stuff. They do stuff for NASA and like all the deep sea subs that have a big, huge sphere that you can sit in. That's what they do. 12-inch thick, formed, shapes. Incredible stuff.
Nice.
Also not cheap.
No, I'm sure. If you can go down to like the Marianas Trench and survive that, I'd imagine you're not going to be the least expensive thing out there. That's for certain.
Yeah.
So Jason, I want to say, man, thank you very much for coming on and talking about yourself, your experiences in the hobby, your experiences,
no problem.
Just starting out, doing what you do, doing what you love, making a top quality acrylic, whether it's a sump or the full-on setups. I do want to throw it out there that one of your tanks that you've made is incredibly popular on YouTube. It's actually, Corey McElroy's 800-gallon tank that he does, fairly consistent video uploads of him, doing feeding the clown loaches and the barbs and all the other fish he has in there. You made that tank. So there are a ton of people listening to this that probably, had no idea who you were, but they for sure know that tank at least. I know, and Corey has put up a couple videos that do feature your shop. I'd encourage people to go check those out. Maybe I'll even link those in the show notes too. But, aside from, you clearly have a very, very popular tank out there that, Corey's got very demanding tastes. And, the fact that you produced actually several tanks for him, that definitely speaks to your quality as well.
Yeah, that was a fun build. And it's definitely impressive watching, the hundreds and hundreds of fish that are in there. It's a cool tank.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, Clear Fabrications, whether people know it or not, I mean, they at least if they listen to this show, they now know that was your work, and I hope they check out your site, and even if they're not in the market for a custom tank, just to follow you on Facebook and Instagram. So Jason, thank you very much again for taking time this evening. I've really enjoyed my conversation with you, and definitely learned a few more things about acrylic tanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Cool, no problem.
All right, Jason, you take care. Have a good night now.
You too. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you again for listening to the Aquarist Podcast. As always, get involved in your local fish club, help grow this wonderful hobby, and have fun with other fish nerds.